Hello, my name is James Arroyo, and welcome to Chapter 10, Communicating in Groups. Groups are going to be everywhere we go. No matter where we go, no matter what we do, we are always going to be in groups, so better understanding them, understanding how they form, as well as some of the challenges regarding groups, will allow us to effectively communicate within these groups and make them better. So, let's discuss why learn about groups. Again, group work happens everywhere we go. In every organization, we have groups. So, it behooves us to understand them more. Understanding how groups form and interact can shed social light on social structures, things like government or even large organizations. And we even have group hate. That we tend to experience a great deal of group hate, or people tend to not like groups. And this negative attitude can then lead to specific behavior, which then leads to a certain result, the self fulfilling prophecy. So, by understanding them more, we can end up creating positive experience with groups and reduce group hate as a result. So there are many characteristics of groups. First, it has to be at least three people because when there's two people, then the only interactions you have to understand are A to B and B to A. Whereas when you even add that third person, then you have a increased complexity of the group. A has to understand the interaction between B. A needs to understand C. You need to also understand A to C. You also need to understand B to C. You also have to understand A to B to C. We also have to understand B to C. B to A. So we have to understand. So as soon as that third person's added, it creates a great deal of complexity of the communication situation. So that is why it has to be three people. Also, it has a shared aspect of identity that there are that there is a certain idea of what the group means. What sort of identity do certain friend groups have? What sort of identity do certain jobs have? Pretty sure I've worked at Target and I've worked at Disneyland, and the shared aspect of identity in those groups that I had were extremely different, as you no doubt probably could have guessed. And we also communicate interdependently, meaning that we are communicating within the groups. So, and we also have a common goal, something that we hope to achieve. There are task goals and social goals. The task goal um, involves achieving certain tasks, and all groups have tasks to achieve. But we also have social goals, and if those social goals are not met, that cohesion, that working well together, then those task roles will be impossible. There are many different types of groups. There are primary groups, support groups, social groups, problem solving groups, study groups, focus groups, teams, and self directed work teams. So we're going to go ahead and dive right into them right now. So let's break it down. We have primary groups. Primary groups are the longest lasting, built around relationships that mean the most to their members. This most often is family, but this can also be very important friend groups. We also have support groups. These address personal problems like AA. But there's more. We also have social groups. Social groups give the opportunities for new relationships, like Go Greek. Fraternities, sororities give an ability for people to form into new relationships. We also have problem solving groups. This has a specific mission. For example, the NRA, their problem solving specific mission is to preserve gun rights. Almost done. We also have study groups. These help prepare exams. Obviously, I'm sure that you've all been in groups like this. And we also have focus groups. Focus groups are a set of individuals asked by a researcher to give opinions on a specific issue. So when someone, this is a lot of times used in advertising, when someone will say, okay, so what did everyone think about the ranch flavored Mountain Dew? You know what? Not the biggest fan. Okay, then they understand that because when they have asked a certain small group, then they've been able to give their opinion on that specific issue. This also works a lot in focus groups about specific candidates. Now to teams. Teams are just a further in the furthering of a group. A group can be a team, but a team is not a group. So, a team is a constellation of members with complementary skills who act as an interdependent unit, are equally committed to a common mission, and subscribe to a cooperative approach to accomplish that mission. So let's break that down a little bit. First, they have complementary skills. Let's take football, for example. The linebacker has a particular skill, just like the quarterback, the ball thrower, for those who don't know football, has a specific skill to help the team win the game. Then the wide receivers have a specific skill. The running back, the person who gets the ball and then runs through, they have a particular skill set, all of which are used to all used to accomplish a specific mission to win the game. They are also an interdependent unit, meaning that if the offense, that group, doesn't do well, then the defense is going to suffer because they have to work harder now. Also, they are equally committed to the common mission, subscribe to a cooperative approach, that they are not trying to act against each other. Instead, they are working together. So you notice now how some groups cannot be teams, especially when there is a very little time commitment. Groups may not be equally committed to a common mission. And lastly, we have self-directed work teams. This is a specific type of team used a lot of times in organizations. It is a group of skilled workers who take responsibility for producing high-quality finished work. IDEO is a great example where they are a design firm, a very successful design firm, where they take a product from design idea all the way through to product. And they work very well together because their team members are empowered and they have complementary skills to achieve that specific mission. So now let's talk about team identity. How is it that we can create this team identity? Because we should strive for a team over just a group, especially in organizations. First, we have symbolic convergence. Symbolic convergence is communicating fantasy themes. For example, a very common fantasy theme in sports is about how that maybe you're down, then you keep on pushing, and then end up winning the game because you strived, that you didn't give up. That is a common fantasy theme throughout sports teams. And we aren't even talking about movies. Obviously, movies affect this as well and is a reflection of these fantasy themes. But we also even get that from our experiences. And guess what? We only talk about the positive experiences than the negative experiences. We also have solidarity symbols. This unifies non-verbally. Team names, logos, uniforms, or style of dress can serve as solidarity symbols. In a channel discrepancy between verbal and nonverbal communication, what's going to be believed? The nonverbal. The nonverbal is believed over the verbal. So when we all look alike, nonverbal communication, then it shows that we are all alike, that we all have the same identity. And then lastly, we have team talk. Team talk is the language of we. Teams establish an identity, a oneness when they speak in terms of we, our, and us, not he, her, they. So in general, we should strive to have this sort of team talk rather than individual talk in our groups. Great, so we've just discussed the different types of groups and teams. Now we're going to be discussing how groups form. And this development of groups was proposed by Tuckman where we have forming, storming, norming, performing, and then adjourning. These do not necessarily go in this order, but they are consistent parts of groups, and by better understanding them, we'll be better able to interact in them. So we start with forming. Forming is gathering members, and there are many reasons why we form into these groups. First, we have a need for belonging. That is a inherent interpersonal need, as we've discussed. So, of course, that's going to also be a factor in group formation. We also have interpersonal attraction, member similarity. That how did you form into your friend group? Probably because you had similar interests. Also, we have attraction of to group activities. Fraternities and sororities very much fall into this. There are certain behaviors that fraternities and sororities do that you cannot do on your own. So we have to form into those sorts of groups. We also have an attraction. We also have an establishment of meaning and identity. A social identity theory. This involves social identity theory, where we have an individual identity, but we also have a social identity, and that is the we. And that if that we is something very, very coveted or sought after, then it will help enhance our pride and self-esteem. And this also very interestingly ties into hazing, because when there is hazing and when there are challenges to joining a group, then the social identity rises in value just simply because not everyone can be a part of this group. Interesting to note. Not that hazing is a good thing. Hazing is a very, very bad thing. We also have a fulfillment of unrelated needs. Fulfillment of unrelated needs involves just those things that this is very much just a coverall, that there are just some unrelated needs that we may need to address. Also, we have some reasons why people form into the reasons why people jump into groups can affect productivity and cohesiveness. So, for example, if someone just jumped into a group just because of interpersonal attraction, they think that, Steve and Jim and Jerry and Susan and Sarah are all really, really cool people, then but it is actually a task group. It's a group that needs to achieve a specific task, then that may affect the productivity of that group. Now we have storming, and storming is feeling tension. This is very much where we get into the challenges, as well as just the general anxiety associated with starting a group. So we want to be sure to find a level that both galvanizes the group and effectively manage the group tension. Both of these are important factors to successful group development. So let's think about that for a second. It is not about eliminating this tension, because if we did not have the tension, then it would very much reduce the productivity of the group. If there is no tension, then we may fall into more social needs and we would not be motivated to do anything until the deadline. So, joking, laughing, chatting about your interests, experiences, and beliefs on non-controversial subjects all serve to reduce this primary tension, the tension that we have as we jump into the group. And then engaging in small talk can also relieve this, but there are cultural variations. For example, more collectivistic cultures tend to have more small talk or more ingrained small talk, whereas individualistic cultures may get right to the point. So again, the goal is not to eliminate this tension. Instead, it is to manage it. Next, we have norming. And norming is regulating the group through norms. Norms are rules that establish standards of appropriate behavior. There are certain appropriate behaviors that we have in groups, and that changes depending on the group. For example, in a friend group, lateness may not be a norm or may not be something that is a big deal, versus in a classroom setting that is a norm. However, in some classrooms that can change, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. So we have explicit norms. Explicit norms are rules that expressly identify acceptable behavior, Whereas implicit norms are rules that are indirectly indicated by uniformities in behavior and attitudes of the members. So let's talk about tardiness. So let's say that a teacher, I don't know, let's call him um, Ames Giroyo. At that point, they say, you know what, you should be arriving on time to class. Then at that point, then that is the explicit norm. But let's say that Steve shows up a little bit late. Then Steve and Susan shows up a little bit late. Then Jerry, Sally, and Tim and Susan and Jerry and Steve all show up late. And as that continues to process, that explicit norm may get overridden into an implicit norm. So, some sources of these norms can be from the system outside the small group. Guess what? The norm of taking attendance every day, that very much is a rule that is passed down to me. In the same way, there may be rules that are also passed down from our culture that affect how we govern behavior as well. We don't tend to swear a lot because it's not culturally acceptable, or at least in some areas. We also have the influence of a single member. A single member in a system or a group can have ripple effects across that group. Let's say that one group member acts in very anti-group member ways. They clown around. They, in general, are not effective. They may create norms that can have serious detrimental effects. In the same way, someone who is an active participant and is striving to work with the group and make them effective, that can also affect the group in its entirety. For example, when I was a student, I was a very, very loud student. What? James? Loud? No, I never would have guessed. That in those situations, the teachers absolutely loved me. And why is it that they loved me? Because I would consistently be having engagement in the class, and other people would start to jump in on the discussion as well. So, one member can influence an entire group. And the group itself can also just create these norms through simple interaction. Now we've discussed that, and now we're going to be discussing the collective effort model, or performing. And this performing is achieving the certain task that the group was designed to do, but the collective effort model is something interesting to note. Members of a group are strongly motivated to perform well in a group if they feel they are convinced that their individual effort will likely help in achieving valued results. So, if members feel that they are not contributing or that their tasks are unimportant, meaningless, busy work, or that the effort is expected to have little effort on the group outcome, even when it's a highly valued outcome, like an A, then social loafing is more likely to occur. Does this sound familiar? We'll discuss this a little bit further in a second. And then lastly, we have adjourning. Adjourning is looking back and disbanding. In general, not every single group has to disband in some way, shape, or form because we only have so much time together. So let's talk now about social loafings. Social loafing is a reticence to participate in group discussion. Shyness does not constitute social loafing. So, how do we address social loafing? Well, in general, we should choose meaningful tasks for groups because if people feel that their contributions are not going to significantly impact the outcome, then why are they going to care? We also want to establish a group responsibility norm. The rules that govern behavior should be based around task goals. Also, note the critical importance of each individual group member's effort. Show that you understand that their effort is getting somewhere. Hold individual members accountable. Establish group cohesiveness. Confront the social loafer if that is where it gets to. A lot of times, if a group comes together and says and confronts this one person, then in a very respectful way, obviously, then it can actually reduce the amount of social loafing. But prevention is better than fixing. And we should also then, if that doesn't work, we should consult a higher power. That's not talking about, any sort of deity. Instead, it is, the teacher, the boss, things like that. And if that doesn't work, boot the social loafer. If that's not an option, sidestep the social loafer. Those are the many ways to address social loafing. And when we sidestep the loafer, unfortunately, that's where we get into social compensation, which is an increased motivation to work harder on a group task to counterbalance the anemic performance of others. Unfortunately, this sometimes just has to happen, but if we address the social loafing effectively, then we will be less likely to have to do social compensation. Now we discuss cliques and social ostracism. First, we start out with cliques. Cliques are coalitions or small subgroups of individuals who have bonded together within a group. So the school is a group, and then certain cliques within it, those are those coalitions. And along with those cliques or coalitions, we then automatically have formed counter coalitions, which are subgroups positioned against another on an issue. This a lot of times works in government, but not necessarily in government. Notice how when in high school, how some students form cliques, and then as a result, since some people were not in those groups, they then form cliques. And when people are not conforming to certain group norms, then eventually, inevitably, social ostracism or social death is likely to occur. This is an exclusion of a certain group member or members. So now that we better understand some of the general group dynamics, we're now going to be discussing how groups communicate together and this also translates to organizations. So networking is a pattern of interaction governing who speaks with whom about what. So centrality is more messages, isolation is less messages. So if we aren't hearing anything, we are isolated. If we hear a lot and we are able to talk to a lot, then we have centrality. So we have the chain. The chain may be CEO talks to upper management talks to middle management talks to lower management talks to the person. This is more isolated because you have just one message being communicated. But as you no doubt know, we also have a game of telephone at this point, and that can then lead to message distortion. Now let's talk about the all channel. The all channel would be fine, right? Where A talks to B, C, D, and E, and etc. The problem with this one, though, would be centrality, more messages. This would be very central, where we all are discussing, but that's ripe for information overload. Information overload is what is affectionately termed as drinking from a fire hose. That you have so much information coming into you that you are not able to consume it. And then lastly, we have the wheel. And the wheel is very interesting because it is isolated, but also central. So B, C, E, and D communicate to A, and then A communicates to B, C, E, and D. So that is networking. Now we talk about roles. And roles, so where the groups are based in norms and roles. And we have to be sure that we have task roles and maintenance roles and to be able to engage in effective group communication. but there are also disruptive roles which can then diminish it. So we start with task roles. Task roles, the central communicative function of task roles is to extract the maximum productivity of the group. So this can include the initiator contributor, which starts offering ideas and suggestions. The information seeker takes inventory of the knowledge base of the group. We have information giver, which researches the topic with the group. The opinion seeker helps the group determine where agreement and even perhaps disagreement exists. We have a clarifier elaborator, which explains, expands, and extends the ideas of others and provides examples and alternatives. We also have the coordinator, which organizes where, when, and how a group meeting will take place. Interesting to note, this is actually one that in groups it tends to be very challenging, and it tends to be one that needs to be formed. That's a role that needs to be fulfilled. We also have the secretary recorder, which serves as a group memory function. We also have the facilitator. This keeps participants on track, guides the discussion, reminds the group of the primary goal that informs the discussion, and regulates interaction. And then lastly, and this one's an interesting one, the devil's advocate role. The devil's advocate role gently challenges a prevailing point of view for the sake of argument to critically evaluate the strength of ideas, solutions, and decisions. The devil's advocate role is actually a very interesting one and a very important one because otherwise the group may very easily fall into extreme cohesiveness where there is no evaluation or analyzing of certain solutions that are presented by the group. If a group has been not productive, it is almost certainly because one or two or three or more of these task roles have not been met. But groups can also be challenged through other reasons, and that is through cohesiveness. The central communicative function of maintenance roles is to gain and maintain cohesiveness of the group. If the group is not cohesive, then one of these roles may not have been fulfilled when it needed to be. So we have the supporter encourager. This bolsters the spirit and goodwill of the group, provides warmth, praise, and acceptance of others, and invites reticent members into the discussion. So let's talk about group hate. If someone has negative spirits and goodwill about the group, they then are more likely to engage in behavior, which will then cause a negative outcome. The supporter encourager reduces this and minimizes this because they try to provide warmth, praise, and acceptance of others and invite reticent members into the discussion. So they help the group in that way. We also, another thing that is that we tend to have a negativity bias where we tend to be Velcro for negative ideas or negative things and Teflon for positive things. So the supporter encourager focuses more on the positive so that this negativity bias is unable to take hold. We also have harmonizer. The harmonizer or tension reliever. This maintains the peace and reduces secondary tension or the challenges that happen in groups by using humor and by reconciling differences among members. So this is to establish that cohesiveness in the group and by making sure that the tension in the group is at an acceptable levels. And then lastly, the gatekeeper or expediter. This controls channels of communication and flow of information, regulating the degree of openness within the group's systems so that all group members are given equal opportunity to participate. This is very much avoiding that information overload situation where we are blasted by information and not able to consume any of it. But also, they help make sure that there is not information underload as well, where people are not open and not participating, and therefore there is not enough information. A lot of times we think task roles are more important than maintenance roles, because the task is more important than how we feel about each other. That's a very individualistic mindset. But if we are unable to have cohesiveness, then there are serious ramifications to the task being accomplished. So task roles and social roles are both things that are required for the group to function effectively. What is not required and doesn't help the group function effectively are disruptive roles. These people focus on themselves. These are the bad apples. And just like the saying goes, a bad apple spoils the bunch. The central communicative function of the self-centered disruptive role is to focus attention on the individual. So this can include the stage hog, which seeks recognition and attention, that they say, oh yeah, I did this, I was awesome, and so on and so forth, and derails the rest of the conversation. And it also communicates a lack of regard for other people's accomplishments. We also have the isolate, which deserts the group and withdraws. That's a common one, but it is also one that destroys the group as a whole, not just because the person's gone, but also because of a lack of regard for the rest of the group. Also, the clown. The clown diverts attention away from serious discussion to self-centered humor. This is not the harmonizer attention reliever, because while they may engage in humor, the clown diverts it away for self-centered reasons. The blocker blocks action that the individual finds objectionable. This is the person who will block everything so that they can get their way. We also have the fighter and controller, tries to dominate group discussion and bully people into their perspective. We have the fighter, which tries to convert members to pet causes so that they may distract the group to do something else, something that maybe they don't want to do, but the zealot wants to do. And then we have the cynic. The cynic displays a sour outlook, engages in fault finding, focuses on negatives, and predicts the group's failure. The cynic is especially challenging to deal with, because when there is a cynic, they display a sour, they basically communicate a lack of regard for the rest of the audience, and as a result, diminish the group as a whole. Now we talk about the group climate. The group climate is the general feeling of a group, and that is affected through cohesion, norms, goal clarity, and individual differences. But let's first discuss what group climate is. Group climate is the emotional atmosphere, the enveloping tone that is created by the way we communicate in groups. So, positive climates are where people feel valued, supported, and treated well by the groups, whereas negative climates are where people do not feel valued, supported, and respected in groups. And these tend to have escalatory cycles. They escalate into more negativity or to more positivity. And where this can go wrong and where we get into negative climate is through negativity bias and disconfirming communication. Negativity bias, again, is this bias towards negative information. We tend to hold negative information more than positive information. And in fact, a perfect example of this negativity bias is in an interview, where someone may have multiple positive characteristics, but then this negativity bias can then be can play into come into effect, and all of that could be disregarded through one small and maybe even innocuous negative characteristic of the potential candidate. But this works with groups in how maybe there's one negative interaction and therefore causes this negative group climate. And to overcome this negativity bias, we should try to have 3 positive experiences for every 1 negative experience. And that can help overcome it. For best results, 5-1, but we'll just leave it at that. Disconfirming communication is the communication that says in a very subtle way, either you do not matter to me or that I am better than you. Both of which can happen in very explicit ways, or what's more likely, in very subtle ways. We also have groupthink. We have cohesion. Cohesion is a good thing. It is the ability to create the ability to create a cohesive group or team means that you all work together without disagreement, and that is good. But strive to maintain cohesiveness and minimize conflict by refusing to critically examine ideas, analyze proposals, or test solutions. That is where we fall into groupthink, and groupthink is bad and can be diminished through the devil's advocate role. So, some symptoms of this or ways to and if we continue to engage in groupthink, what will end up happening is that we will not get to the right solutions. So, some ways to identify when groupthink is happening is if tough questions are being ignored or discouraged, justify decisions instead of testing them. Opposing views are then pressured to conform to the standard, what everyone else believes, and we avoiding. And if we feel a pressure to avoid expressing disagreement altogether, then groupthink is more likely to is happening, and we should try to reduce it. Next, we talk about group norms, and we've discussed them. There's explicit and implicit group norms, and they help govern acceptable behavior in groups. But we have unproductive norms, and unproductive norms are incredibly challenging. A good example of this would be the lateness norm. In fact, groups are more likely to be more effective than individuals, with the exception of when norms of mediocrity or norms of just getting by, those are established. So we want to be sure that we are expressing higher ideals than the mediocre. But expressing loyalty and dedication to show you have the group's best interests at heart, that is one way to reduce some of these unproductive norms. We also have citing specific behavior harmful to the group's effectiveness, and asking others for opinions on problem behaviors identified. So that instead of communicating in a disconfirming way, saying, here's the problems, and that's it. Instead, by communicating in confirming ways, saying, I value your input, asking for other people's opinions on these sorts of things. By doing that, that can reduce some of the unproductive norms. Goal clarity is also an important one. Goal clarity, or understanding the purpose of the group, is important to getting tasks accomplished effectively. And when the goal is not clear, then there is an uncertain climate, which can then cause some serious problems and redundancies in group effectiveness. Basically, two people may take the same role. And lastly, we have individual differences. And more diverse groups tend to work better and more effectively than similar groups. That being said, there are obviously some benefits because we have more viewpoints, but there are also some detriments that we may have certain misunderstandings. But when we are trying to solve problems or come to different solutions, diverse perspectives will allow us to have a wider swath of ideas than a very similar group. Individual differences, one of the big hindrances is communication apprehension, that we feel that we should not communicate. We have an anxiety towards communication when we have diverse groups. This can be for many reasons. First, a lack of self-esteem, a feeling that my opinion is not worth it, and that can lead to a self-fulfilling cycle, self-fulfilling prophecy, which can then lead to lower self-esteem. We also have status differences, feeling that I'm not as high as this other person in terms of hierarchy, so that I don't feel like my voice matters. But this also perpetuates itself. And because if I feel like I am of lower status and I don't communicate, then of course, when I don't communicate, those status differences are going to be amplified. And then lastly, unbalanced participation. And this is one that we can definitely, all of these are things that we can deal with, but unbalanced participation is one that is easiest to deal with. That is when Steve says a lot, but Jerry, Fred, and Tim don't say anything. And then that creates a norm where Jerry says a lot and Steve and Jerry and Tim, or whatever their name was, they don't participate. And that can then create that norm of acceptable behavior, that implicit norm, which then governs future interactions. So that concludes groups. Have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll see you next time.